Picture this. A 34-year-old socialist mayor takes office in the most expensive city in America. He campaigns on one promise above all else: freeze the rent, save the tenants, take down the greedy landlords. The crowds go wild. The T-shirts sell out. He wins in a landslide. And then, almost immediately, the plan starts falling apart. New York City already has a 1.4% rental vacancy rate, the lowest since 1968. More than half of all renter households spend over 30% of their income on housing. The crisis is real, undeniable. Nobody on either side of this debate is questioning that. But the cure Mayor Zohran Mamdani just prescribed for New York City's housing emergency? Economists are alarmed. Landlords are at their breaking point. Real estate investors are calling the city uninvestable. And here's the part that should make every renter in New York sit up straight. The people being hurt worst by this plan are not the billionaire developers Mamdani talks about at his rallies. They're the working class tenants he swore to protect. The Motley Fool today, we break down exactly how this happened, who's really paying the price, and what insiders are now whispering about where this ends. Because this is not just a New York story. If your city has a mayor who thinks they can override economics with ideology, this is your warning. What do you think? Is a rent freeze actually saving New Yorkers, or is it about to make everything worse? Drop that in the comments right now. And if you want breakdowns like this every week, stories about how government decisions hit your wallet directly, subscribe and hit that notification bell, because this channel exists for exactly this moment. Let's understand who Zohran Mamdani is, because it matters enormously here. Mamdani is a self-described socialist. One of his chief campaign promises was to freeze rents on rent-stabilized housing units. His campaign platform bluntly declared that we can't afford to wait for the private sector to solve the housing crisis. He ran on free bus rides, government-run grocery stores, and an uncompromising message that the city's housing problem was caused by greed, and greed alone. And it worked. He won. Fox News, the median rent in a stabilized apartment was about $1,500 in 2023, significantly below the citywide median. Black, Latino, and low-income residents are overrepresented as tenants in rent-stabilized apartments and could especially benefit from a freeze. So the political instinct here isn't crazy. These people are genuinely struggling. The median income for a rent-stabilized household is around $60,000 a year, and any rent hike could push them out of the city entirely. But good intentions and good policy are two completely different things. And the gap between what Mamdani promised and what his plan is actually delivering is getting wider by the day. The moment he took office, Mamdani appointed 6 new members to the 9-seat NYC Rent Guidelines Board, giving himself a working majority ahead of the June 2026 vote that will set rent policy for leases beginning October 1st. He didn't waste a single day. The machinery was set. But then came the bigger announcement, the one that sent shockwaves through the entire real estate industry. And that's where this story gets truly alarming. Last week, Mamdani stood in front of a crowd in Brooklyn and said this, and I want you to listen to every single word carefully.
Through our new citywide campaign, Fix the City, we will focus on the worst landlords in New York City. When necessary, we will take aggressive legal action to remove negligent owners and property managers. And for buildings that have suffered chronic neglect, we will work to transfer ownership to responsible stewards, stewards that include community land trusts, nonprofits, or even the tenants themselves.
Tech stack IPO. Read that again. The mayor of New York City, one of the financial capitals of the world, just announced a plan to seize private property and redistribute it to government-backed organizations. He's calling them responsible stewards. Critics are calling it something far more serious. Now, here is the 3-step playbook that analysts say is already in motion. Step 1, freeze rents, so landlords cannot raise income to cover rising costs. Step 2, as buildings deteriorate financially under that income freeze, allow them to fall into legal distress through code enforcement. Step 3, use city enforcement powers to force those distressed buildings into the hands of nonprofits, community land trusts, and tenant collectives that are politically aligned with City Hall. Analysts describe exactly this strategy: capping landlord income, allowing buildings to become distressed, then using city enforcement to push properties into nonprofit or community land trust ownership. Augustus Wealth, and here is where the rumors start circulating. And they are circulating hard right now. Multiple sources close to real estate industry groups in Manhattan are saying that the Fix the City campaign is not random enforcement. Word is that a pre-approved list of targeted buildings already exists inside City Hall, that the administration has identified specific portfolios it intends to move through this pipeline, freezing income, waiting for financial distress, then moving in. Nobody has confirmed this publicly, but the pattern is consistent, and the insiders talking about it are not nobodies. They are attorneys, brokers, and former city housing officials who have watched this city's politics for decades. The city will launch Fix the City, starting with at least 10 of the worst landlord portfolios, with the end goal of forcing them to sell to responsible preservation purchasers, approved by both Tenants and the Mamdani administration. 10 portfolios to start, but insiders are asking, where does it stop? Once the legal and administrative machinery is in place to seize and redistribute private property, what prevents it from expanding? What's the definition of chronic neglect in a city where buildings are being financially starved by the very policies the mayor is implementing? CBS News. And then there is this. In January, a building Mamdani had used to advertise his housing commissioner's qualifications turned out to have 200 unresolved violations: rat and roach infestations, mold, broken doors, after 2 nonprofits ran it into the ground, making conditions dramatically worse than they were under the private landlord. 200 violations under nonprofit management, under the watch of the same administration now promising to transfer New York City's housing stock to more nonprofits. SEC.gov. That is not an opinion. That is a documented fact. And it is sitting right at the center of everything Mamdani is trying to sell New Yorkers right now. The business and real estate community's response has been immediate and brutal. And it is coming from voices that are very hard to dismiss. The Wall Street Journal has warned that Mamdani's approach is making New York City's housing market effectively uninvestable for private capital. When the Wall Street Journal says a major American city is uninvestable, lenders listen, insurers listen, developers listen. And right now, they are all listening and making the same decision. New York Apartment Association CEO Kenny Burgos said flatly, "This mayor has talked a big game on fixing housing, but this proposal is severely lacking. Thousands of buildings are bankrupt. Not struggling, not under pressure, bankrupt." That is the word a housing industry CEO is using to describe New York's existing affordable housing stock right now, before the rent freeze has even officially hit. NBC News. Ann Korchak, board president of the Small Property Owners of New York, put it plainly. It's impossible to freeze rents when expenses to operate housing continue to rise. Revenue, which is rent in housing, needs to rise to cover rising expenses. Insurance premiums for residential properties have more than doubled since 2019. Utility costs remain elevated. Property taxes, which make up 40 to 50% of some small owners' operating costs, have increased steadily for years. TechCrunch. On top of all of this, Mamdani has proposed a 9.5% property tax increase if Albany lawmakers refuse to raise taxes on corporations and the wealthy. For small landlords operating on thin margins, the combination of frozen revenues and rising expenses creates an impossible equation. What now here is the part the mainstream media is not covering loudly enough. Sources close to several major real estate investment groups, and this is unconfirmed but coming from multiple directions simultaneously, say that private developers are already quietly pulling residential permit applications across all 5 boroughs. Not publicly, no press conference, no announcement, just a quiet stop. Internal memos being circulated in development firms reportedly describe New York City as a no-build zone for market-rate residential under current policy direction. One senior developer, speaking anonymously to a real estate publication, put it this way: "When you freeze income, raise taxes, and signal you may seize buildings, the only rational decision is to stop building. One analyst described the atmosphere perfectly. It's just like old conservative middle-aged bankers being like, "Oh my God, you want to underwrite a construction loan under socialism?" And the deeply ironic consequence of all of this, a rent freeze on stabilized units, which make up 40% of occupied NYC rentals, could slow tenant turnover even further, tighten supply, and ultimately push market rate rents even higher for the tenants who aren't in stabilized apartments. The plan designed to lower rents for New Yorkers may end up raising rents for the half of the city that Mamdani's policies can't reach. This is the part that never makes it onto the campaign poster. This is what happens on the ground in real buildings to real families when ideology meets reality. Valentina Goichai owns 2 rent-stabilized apartment buildings in the Bronx. She told the Washington Post, "Why is he targeting us? This is my investment and something I expect to retire on. What happens to me when I can no longer afford to run these buildings?" Valentina is not a corporation. She is not a hedge fund. She is a woman in the Bronx who saved, borrowed, and invested in her community. She owns 2 buildings, and she is terrified. Now ask yourself, what happens to the tenants in those 2 buildings when Valentina can no longer afford to keep the heat on, fix the elevator, or repair the roof? The answer is not that the city swoops in with a better solution. The answer is that those buildings fall into distress, code violations pile up, and the same tenants Mamdani promised to protect are living in deteriorating conditions while the city works through a years-long legal process to transfer ownership to a nonprofit that, based on documented evidence, may make conditions even worse. Tens of thousands of government-subsidized affordable units are already under financial distress right now, with expenses rising faster than the rents they are legally allowed to charge. This is before the freeze. This is with the current system. And Mamdani's answer is to freeze rents further and hand failing buildings to the same class of organizations that produced 200 code violations in his own administration's showcase property. NBC News, the seniors, the low-income families, the Black and Latino households overrepresented in rent-stabilized apartments across the city. These are the people who will live with the mold, the broken elevators, the rodent infestations. Not Mamdani, not his deputy mayors, not the nonprofit executives who will be handed these buildings, the people he promised to protect. And the renters who are not in stabilized apartments, the young professionals in Astoria, the immigrant families in Flushing, the service workers in Flatbush who never got into the stabilized system. They face a different but equally brutal outcome. As construction stalls, as private capital exits, as the supply of new apartments dries up, their market rate rents keep climbing. New York City rents are already averaging over $4,000 per month, with a record low vacancy rate of around 1.4%. There is nowhere to go. And the policies now being put in place ensure that nowhere to go becomes a permanent condition. Substack, the Rent Guidelines Board votes in June 2026. Whatever they decide sets rent policy for leases beginning October 2026 through September 2027. With Mamdani's appointed majority controlling the board, the freeze is the most likely outcome. After that, the clock starts running. Substack, buildings that are already financially stressed go deeper into the red. The Fix the City enforcement campaign begins identifying its next wave of targets beyond the initial 10 portfolios. Private construction continues to stall. The housing supply tightens further. And in 12 to 18 months, the data will start showing what economists are already predicting, that rents in the unregulated market have spiked, that stabilized buildings are deteriorating faster, and that the net housing available to working New Yorkers has actually decreased under the mayor who promised to fix it. Mamdani is trying to balance his pro-tenant rent freeze campaign promise with the reality that parts of the city's affordable housing network are already in financial shambles. He knows this. His own team knows this. The carve-out he quietly announced, allowing one-time rent increases on certain vacant units, even under a broader freeze, is the clearest possible signal that his administration understands the financial stress his policy is creating. But a small carve-out does not fix a fundamentally broken equation. It just softens the political headlines while the structural damage continues. Fortune and the people of New York, the tenants in the Bronx, the small landlords in Queens, the young renters in Brooklyn priced out of the stabilized system, they will live in that damage long after the press conferences are over and the campaign slogans are forgotten. This is what happens when government decides it can override economics with good intentions. The rent freeze sounds like justice. The Fix the City campaign sounds like accountability. But behind the slogans, the math doesn't work. And when the math doesn't work, it is never the mayor who pays the price. It is always the people. Is your city's mayor making the same moves? Are you seeing affordable housing policies in your neighborhood that are quietly making things worse? Drop it in the comments. Let's talk about what's actually happening on the ground where you live. If this video opened your eyes, hit the like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications. The next video connects even bigger dots. Don't miss it.